So I want to bring in, without further ado, Sergey Brin, co-founder of Google.
Hey, thanks for coming.
So, right there. Oh, I'm so glad you didn't wear your toe shoes.
Thank God.
But you know, I can take these off pretty easily, and then you'll see my
Okay,
toes.
great. I thought so.
All right, I'll
I knew we
cover
were
up.
going
Sorry,
there. Here,
I
I
want
can
to
do
be
it
proper.
too.
So, you were last at one of our conferences, I think over a decade ago. I think it was the first D or maybe the second. And, you know, it was all about search at that point. I can remember us having a discussion about advertising and why would someone click on a non-organic search result. And I'm pretty sure I remember you talking about how you had bought a green laser pointer or something, and how useful that was to you. Well, I mean, but you were trying to give an example of, you know, the benefits of this. So, how is Google a different company from the company that it was at that point?
First of all, the green laser pointer has proven very useful. But my vision is still intact. It was, I remember it was one of the really high power ones you can't really get in the US properly. But yeah, I followed an ad. I think it was like a 50 milliwatt or something, and it was one of our advertisers. How has Google changed? I think, you know, clearly it's a much larger company. There's a lot more to deal with. You know, in many ways, it's maybe less fun. But I think the roots in what we do are similar. With search, we took a university research project and you know, made it sustainable, and we've been very lucky for it to be successful in providing search to the world on the web. And I think many of the other things that we do, and especially the things that I focus on in Google X, are also about taking research and bringing it to life into things that we hope will transform the world.
So getting on this is, you're a larger company. Let me start with that sentence, because you are a larger company.
It's very upsetting. I'm not sure I can accept this right now.
Okay.
All right.
When you talk about larger, people think about the power of Google now, much more so than they used to. They're scared of it. They've got worries in Europe. There's all kinds of things going on. How do you perceive the company? How internally do you all look at it when people look at you in a much different light, as a much more aggressive company, a company that has so much information about them, a company that has no governance in the way, given all the data you have collected about people? How do you look at it from the inside looking out as what you consider the company?
Look, I'm sure the internal view is, you know, very different than the external view. You know, it's kind of David versus Goliath. Only the external view, Google's the Goliath, and the internal view, we're David. Mm-hmm. But I think the truth is in between. I think that you know, there are many services we provide to many people, and I think we have a lot of responsibility to do a good job of that, and to be a responsible world citizen. I think at the same time there are a lot of issues in the world, on the internet, you know, the kind of thing that Gwyneth Paltrow talked about just a second ago, and I think in many cases people associate all of those things with Google, and you know, sometimes it's just outside of our domain, or perhaps it's something that's a social phenomenon worldwide and not necessarily Google specific. You personally were very tough on sort of the whole question of doing business in China under the conditions that the Chinese government had set up, and I think you got a lot of praise for that. But we obviously all know now that our government, I'm not saying it's the equivalent thing, but our government also does some things that
in the gathering of information that are troublesome to a lot of people, worrisome. How do you propose to handle that? I mean, you can't, I guess you could, but with China, you just exited. You just didn't participate. That's probably not an option here, I would assume. So what do you do?
No, it's a great question. In China, we exited in the sense we reorganized the way the business works there, and we're to not be subject to their censorship laws internally. And we do still serve search to China. We have always. But anyway, that's its own nuanced view. The Snowden revelations were a huge disappointment, certainly to me and to obviously to the world as a whole. I think from my perspective, if you go back to the Cold War, when presumably the NSA was spying on a small number, relatively small number of people, Soviet, whatever, generals and various, Communist Party officials and so forth. And as a consequence, in theory, was protecting us from total nuclear annihilation. I think that, that's one kind of balance. I think in the recent decade or two, if you look at counterterrorism as the mission, and in order to prevent that, you kind of have to surveil everybody, and like apparently they did on a very mass scale, and to stop something that's not quite the entire annihilation of the world. I think the balance looks really different, and I guess I don't know that anybody ever reevaluated that, but yeah, it came as a shock certainly to.
It came as a shock to you all. Had no clue that this was occurring.
No, and then when you see the slides, the things about, tapping our backbone fibers, things like that, those all came as a shock. Now, we were doing things over the number of years to secure our users and our networks anyway, because we realized we were up against nation states. We weren't specifically thinking of the US, but we were already in process of encrypting our, yeah, it was a little bit of a surprise. But fortunately, from a technological point of view, when you make something secure, you make it secure. You try to use, mathematically secure, cryptography and so forth. So it doesn't actually matter who is spying on you. In fact, by the time the snooping on the backbone slides came out, we had already been encrypting the vast majority of our traffic on the backbone for a while prior to that, and there are a bunch of crypto things that we had done years before, known as elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, that we hope and still all the evidence indicates was more secure than the cryptography without forward secrecy that most sites and that we were using a number of years prior. Anyhow, I won't bore you with all the details. The point is that we were upping all of our defenses for years prior to that to withstand nation-state level attacks, and I think that helped.
What responsibility now does Google have to prevent this or do something? Do you think Google's been aggressive enough, given it's the most important, probably, internet company in the world at this point?
There's always more you can do. We have a group that's hundreds or approaching 1,000 people that's working on internet security, and they're very, very talented and very good. But there's always more you can do, and also on a policy front. I mean, there are a lot of these revelations have raised a lot of good policy questions for the United States in particular, which it really makes look very hypocritical, and I think that's a problem. I think that these policies should be revisited.
So there are people who would listen to that and say, well, he's saying it's a bad thing for the NSA to know all these things, but he's perfectly happy if Google knows everything about us. How do you respond to that? I mean, you know a lot about everybody in this room. I don't mean you personally right at this moment.
No, him personally.
Maybe there's a chip in your shoe. I don't know, but
Well, okay, but the word "no" does imply a level of sentience that's I don't believe is there.
Okay.
So yes, there's a lot of data that we process, a lot of data that we store, and ultimately you need to have For example, if we do a good job with your email, we actually need to store the email so you can search it, find it, display it, and so forth. Similarly, to do a great job of web search, we need to have the web pages. We need to understand how well we're serving our users currently and things like that. So there is a lot of data you just have to have in order to do that. There are many precautions that we take in terms of, internally who and what systems have access to what data, and those are things that we're also always elevating and always making more secure to prevent any kind of abuse. I think that one of the, unlike, for example, the NSA certainly, which I would distinguish ourselves by a long shot, but even other kinds of companies, for example, the credit risk ones, we actually have a direct consumer-facing brand so that people, that the trust that people have in us is very important to us as a company. We wouldn't survive if people didn't trust us. So we are very motivated to safeguard that data and to use it appropriately.
So you don't think there's a possibility of the equivalent of a Snowden whistleblower leaking a bunch of stuff that would shock people about maybe Google not behaving the way you just described?
I'm sure we've made our share of mistakes, and certainly you guys have seen some of those, and they've come out. And I'm not claiming that we do a perfect job. There was the Street View Wi-Fi stuff, for example, that was clearly an error. We were logging things we weren't supposed to be, and I don't think that we're perfect, but we certainly strive to be. And I think if you were to come in and see our executive meetings or the emails and the deliberations that happen.
We'll do it.
Okay. Yeah, great. Thanks.
I'll
call Rachel.
We have a startup. We could learn something from going to your executive.
Rachel's in the back going.
I will think about how to arrange such a thing. No, but seriously, I think somebody coming in, we have people who care very deeply about privacy, people who say, stop, even though, if you process that data and that thing, you might learn something, you have to employ this safeguard and that safeguard, or maybe you shouldn't do that at all.
What do you think of privacy today? What's happened to it? You, as the founder of a company that has more data about any one group of people that have this much data, what is your definition of what privacy is right now?
What is my definition of privacy? Wow, that's a big question. I think that privacy is the expectation that certain personal secret things stay secret and don't get exposed to other people that you wouldn't want it to. I think that's...
So is that possible today?
I think it's...
Remember, even many years ago, Scott McNeely said, oh, it's gone, forget about it. If your privacy is just over, it's gone. I'm paraphrasing him. Do you believe that, or do you believe...
Yeah, no, I certainly believe that. I think, I think there are certainly counterexamples like the Snowden slides themselves. Obviously, they intended for those to stay private. But I think the vast majority of data, if you look at people who use Gmail or things like that, their private messages stay private.
Okay. So let's start on talking about what you do all day.
Yeah.
Because we are curious about what you do all day. You have been pushing forward this moonshot idea. This idea, well, I don't know. How do you define it?
Why don't you tell us?
Tell us what you do all day.
And can I ask you, before you do that, I'm super curious about this. You are not the CEO. Like when you guys were here 10 or 11 years ago, I think the two of you and Eric were sort of running the place, but you've put most of your energy, as you said, into Google X. Why? Why did you not want to be the CEO, or what was the deal there?
Is that true? Am I not the CEO? Rachel, that wasn't one of my little bullet points for this preparation. That's embarrassing. Okay. Okay, well.
Given
what
you're
is it
not
we were here to
another
talk about?
recode scoop.
Okay. No, I'm not the CEO, and very much by choice. All of the, there are many challenging regulatory issues that we deal with and challenging employee issues and a whole bunch of things that I'm glad Larry is taking on and not me. I have been working on Google X about 3-ish years, maybe a little bit more now. and I've really, really loved it. And it takes me back to my roots anyway, which is to take some more researchy early tech thing and to try to bring it to life into something that's going to be widely used. And also it's kind of at a reasonable scale. We have precisely 8 projects, and I don't allow new ones until we graduate them. For the most part, things like indoor maps, the indoor location for maps came out of Google X. But most of the work we've done has not yet come out. It's
You
been
say 8 projects?
8.
So we know of how many?
I don't know how many you know
3.
of. You
Well,
probably know
Loon.
of all of them, Karen.
I know I don't.
Yeah.
No.
Or actually,
I know you're building a time machine, because when I came to see this new thing, I thought it was a time machine and you were going to make me go back and kill Hitler. So something like that. But you have
But
Loon?
you have those Loon project.
The Loon.
yes, Project Loon. Those are the
Propagate internet.
balloons. These are high-altitude balloons that, similarly to satellites, can provide internet around the world. And those are flying. We had recently announced we had one go twice around the world. I can actually probably, I think we've certainly hit 3 times around the world by now, and I think maybe 4.
Okay.
Okay.
Which
The
is
point of
exciting.
which is to connectivity everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, if you go most places in the world, even heck, around here in California, there's no coverage in many places, and obviously in the developing world, it's even worse. And these balloons are a really affordable way to get coverage everywhere.
So
All
you got glass.
Glass.
Project Glass, yes, it's right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We would have been very disappointed if you didn't bring those. Yeah.
I brought it. I mostly wear it outside is the thing. I have the shades on, and so I don't use it
So where are
indoors.
you with glass now? There's a lot of backlash to glass. There's a lot of controversy around it, but it's also a very interesting concept of where we're going.
There's a fair amount of backlash in the press. I don't know, day to day. Certainly when I love to use it. I use it mostly outdoors when I'm biking or with my kids. It's great. I was just in the ocean with my kids the other day, and I was, waiting. These aren't waterproof yet, but I happened to be waiting, and I could take great pictures, and I wouldn't have been able to fumble with my phone while I'm keeping them from drowning. And so anyway, I get a lot of use out of them for when I'm doing sports or with kids and I'm outside. And we've had a lot of explorers who've had really positive experiences with them. And there are more and more, actually. We just recently opened the site up, so anybody can become an explorer now. But we're still in the explorer phase. We're still learning. I've certainly learned a lot about just from using these over the past year or so. And fundamentally, what I've learned for myself, and I think what a lot of our explorers have learned, is they get the most value out of them when they do use them in the context in combination with eyewear. So this is the shades version, like so. Which maybe will look dorky by wearing shades indoors right now, but we also just started shipping a few months ago the prescription version. So if you guys are wearing glasses, you'd have this. You'd be able to also record the video of your interview, which could be fun.
Which you just did, didn't you?
Which you just did.
I
We
didn't
saw the
actually,
light go on.
No, I didn't. The display did go on because when you put it on, it tells you what time it is.
Yeah, that's
Or
what
I
you
can-
say,
I'll- I
but
will-
who knows?
Here,
Hello.
I'll take a picture.
I hate those
Here,
things.
I
Take
can
them off.
record it. There we go.
All right, you need to
What-
stop.
All right,
Oh,
take
yeah.
them off.
Does Megan wear them at home?
Is it going to be a
Come on.
commercial product this year?
Okay, we'll do a 10-second video now. You could ask me your questions.
Read between the lines on
As,
that one. Okay. So,
Has my
I'll stop.
credit history come up on there yet?
We
Or
don't
does it need
do
a few more
any-
seconds?
so what's the point? Where are you going with these? We like to make glass hole jokes all the time. It's just fun for us press people. But where are you going? What's the concept of what it's?
Well, fundamentally, if you think about where computing has gone, from the big mainframes to your desktop, laptop, now to a mobile phone, it's gotten closer and more intimate, and more instantly available at any time. But it's still not as convenient as it could be. In fact, the way I've thought about Google since we spun it out of the university is augmenting your knowledge with the knowledge of the world.
Right.
And for that to be true, obviously all of us sometimes get asked questions. We're like, oh, I'll look that up, I'll whip it out. And we even have, speech enabled on the phone. Oops. Just dropped everything. Oh, here's my hotel key vault for later.
Sergey, we're not going there tonight, okay?
No. No.
So rather than pulling out the phone, what was the
this is
famous
because
thing?
glass, I'll leave the glass off, I promise. Okay.
Oh dear. This isn't San Francisco,
All right.
okay? This is not San Francisco. We're down in Palos Verdes. But with the point being, you made, what was the word you used about taking out a phone? It was not manly, or what was it?
Oh, no, I'd rather not repeat that.
Okay, all right,
I'm
good.
going to go use the Gwyneth defense that got,
But
circulated
the idea is
everywhere.
that it becomes more intimate computing.
You want it to be like your knowledge. When there's something important or useful to you, you want to be able to access that quickly and get it out of the way quickly. I mean, that's kind of the thing that I think people miss, that they're like, oh, there's all this extra electronics in my life now. The fact is, I'm much more present with my kids, for example, when I have that, because I take picture, it's done, that's it. I'm not, fumbling with my hands or looking down. I'm able to be there and go on with my life, or whatever sport I'm doing. I'm able to have that, and if there's something important or I just want to check the time, it's right there like that. So it's very much about getting the benefits of technology, the information you want instantly when you want it, and not more so. And in my case, I do really love the photography, but without crowding your world with more management. And the phone it's come a really long way, but there is a barrier to taking it out of your pocket or purse and turning it on and futzing with it and looking down at it and not being present.
So,
Is this going to be a commercial product this year?
This year, plus or minus.
what?
Plus or minus?
Plus or minus. I'm not sure. I can't tell you exactly. I would hope that we could by the end of the year, but I'm not sure. I mean, we do want to incorporate the learnings that we've gotten, and we've learned a lot about how people actually use this and what works for them and what doesn't work for them. And it just takes time to incorporate those changes and to be able to manufacture at scale.
Third one is the driverless car.
Which we're going to talk about tonight.
The self-driving car, yes.
So there's something new on that, right?
New on that. We're going to show you first the video, right?
You told me. Yeah.
Yes.
We had
a video. Liz Gaines and I went down to Google, and they actually surprised me, which is a rare thing anymore, with a product that they are going to announce right now. Video? This is my reality television show. Whoa. It's an interesting idea, and sort of conceptually where things are going, where people just get in these vehicles and they just get driven places by them. Yeah. Whoa.
So if you want to buckle up.
Yeah, so yes, I definitely want to do that.
Okay. George's going to send you off for a ride for a few minutes.
Make sure there's a buckle seatbelts and press when ready. So do you want me to push go?
Just press the button.
Liz?
Yep.
Good.
Off you go.
All right.
See you in a couple minutes.
Okay, thanks. It's delightful. It's kind of an obvious idea at the same time. Like, shouldn't there be, why are we glomming things onto cars? Why don't we just create cars that are self-driving from the start? So it's kind of interesting. It's also adorable. This is pretty cool, I have to say. Oh, damn you, Google. It's cool. Once again. Wow. Very nice. I like it much better than Google Glass. I will not put those things on, okay? Thank you for leaving that in.
What's the...
Okay, wait.
What's,
First, come on, try it on. Try it on. Oh, come on.
I hate these things. Jeez.
Okay.
All right, there you go. That's
But
it.
don't look at my texts. That's
taking
good.
your
See, I can't take your picture now wearing them because I don't have them.
All I want to do is suck up
wish I had
information
another
about
pair.
the world around me. So, the car. This is a fully...
I'm sure Samsung will be happy that you said that.
What you're introducing, does it have a name, this thing that you built, this clown car thing?
This is just our prototype. It doesn't have a name because we're still at the prototype stage.
All right, so
And-
this is a fully self-driving car, not added on to a car.
This is, I mean, you notice the key thing is it doesn't have a steering wheel.
No, I noticed that.
You notice that when you're in it, or pedals.
Nothing. No brakes, no accelerator, no steering wheel, which was worrisome to me. on many levels. So you just got in, I pushed a button and it went, and it did the course that it was supposed to do based on the maps and the radar and things like that.
Yeah, so we took a look from the ground up as to what would it be like if we had self-driving cars in the world, and what should they be like. And we've been building prototypes of that, and you got to experience one of our earliest prototypes, actually. That's a project.
You've had to go past this prototype because it crashed too often, or what?
We have not had any crashes.
Okay.
We test these things very carefully, and you were in the parking lot.
Right, we were in a
parking lot test.
Thank you.
But no, we have not had any crashes with that.
Let's talk conceptually what you're doing.
What's the conception behind it? How does the world look with these cars?
Yeah, so the reason that I'm super excited about these prototypes and the self-driving car project in general is the ability to change the world and the community around you. I mean, first off, there are all the people who are underserved by transportation today. And if you're not in a major city, you're not like in Manhattan, there's not a zillion cabs out there. There's not great public transportation, buses and things, most places in the US, certainly where we are in Silicon Valley, there are not. And if you look at people who are too young, too old, disabled, in various ways can't get around, that's a huge issue, and it's really a challenge for them. I remember actually when we were just first got this prototype shipped, and I was biking to work, and I passed by a bus stop on my bike, and there was this little old lady who had just walked up, and I saw the bus had just left, and she was carrying like her groceries or something, and I felt really sad for her because I knew, the buses come really infrequently. It was going to be at least an hour for her where we are, and it was going to be a big burden for her to get to wherever she was going, and she probably was going to have to walk a long way from the bus stop anyway. And we could serve so many people by having widespread.
So what would be the scenario for that woman? She would summon one of these cars?
She would summon the cars, one of the cars, or perhaps there would actually be enough of them around she could hail it. But at the very least, just with a phone app, you get the car to pull up.
With her Galaxy S5?
I'm sure she had a cell phone. I'm not positive she had the Galaxy S5.
So she would call it up. It would just arrive empty, correct? One of these cars.
Yeah.
And then she would say where she wanted to go?
She would say where she wanted to go, or she could use, by the way, this is very early stages of R&D. The actual, UI for the summoning isn't something we've put a lot of work into. She would just do that actually in the app, probably just say I'm going from here to here. And then the car would pull up, she would get in, and off it would go.
To where it was going. And it has the same qualities as the self-driving cars you're fashioning onto current cars. The lasers, the radar, the cameras.
Yeah, so actually we can do better. The main reason that I wanted to do we collectively, the team and I decided to develop this prototype vehicle is that we can do a better job than we can by adding onto an existing vehicle, which most of our cars, we have Priuses and Lexuses right now. And the things that we're able to do, first of all, the experience feels different.
Yeah.
You've probably tried one of our prior.
Yes, I was in a car. It was like being in a car.
But feeling, you're just sitting there in the front, there's no steering wheel, no pedals. For me, it was actually very relaxing. It was just, I don't know how you felt, but I
wanted a drink.
You wanted a drink? You can.
I wanted to text and drink at the same time while I was doing it.
And you can. And I was, in about 10 seconds after getting in, I was like doing my email, and I forgot I was there. And it reminded me of, catching like a chairlift by yourself. I guess you had your partner in there with you, so.
Right.
But there's a bit of solitude when you catch one of these by yourself that I found really enjoyable. And
it was more comfortable.
Yeah,
it was like a couch. It was like sitting on a couch.
Yeah, that's very comfortable. But the big one is really in safety. And it has to do with where we can put all the sensors, the lasers, the radars, things like that. The placement becomes much more optimal in terms of not having obstructions to them being able to see around. There are these prototypes have redundant steering. So typically, a typical car will have power steering motors, but the theory is that if that fails, then you are the backup, which it's actually, takes a lot to turn the steering wheel of a car when this power steering goes out, but the driver is the backup. So in the self-driving car, we don't have that.
Right.
So that has redundant power steering motors. And the brakes are also redundant for that same reason.
What about other cars on the road? Like this is in a city, they only go 25 miles per hour, correct?
So these vehicles are limited to 25 miles an hour, which is another level of safety. Because any kind, well, first of all the sensors and all the software we put in will avoid collisions. Now, nothing can be perfect, and you can't, there's laws of physics that if somebody appears right in front of you, you just can't stop in time. And so having the lower speed increases safety. And we've actually designed these with some safety features that haven't ever been created before, but there's about like 2 feet of foam on the front, and the windshield is actually made not of glass, but it's a plastic kind of like this. It gives, and we've already done a whole bunch of testing and simulations, and we'll do physical tests that should make it far safer than any other car from a pedestrian protection.
And how did you get this built? Did you commission a car factory, or how did you get this built?
We've worked with partners like in the Detroit area, in Germany, and California. We've used automotive suppliers, so this is using car parts that are kind of standard, but sometimes we've modified them to our needs. For example,
but how about the whole body? I mean,
yeah, we've worked with partners, auto manufacturing firms that have helped us with the body. And
how many are you building of these? Because I think
we'll have about
200 or 300, right?
We're planning to go up to about 100 or 200 of these. These are the prototypes. Let me tell you a little bit more about why else we're building a part of the vision. So, allowing people who can't get around to get around is one. There's also a huge tax on the community by having all these individually owned and operated cars. Most cars sit parked about, 96 or 97% of the time. And for every car, there are about 3 parking spaces. And this is just a huge load on the community in terms of space. The land area we dedicate to parking, for example, if you guys look out here, there's tons and tons of parking. And by the way, the stat I recently read was that about 30%, during a peak hour, about 30% of the driving you see in a city is people looking for parking. So that goes away if you just if you have self-driving cars that just drop you where you need to go and they go off, pick up another passenger. In terms of congestion on the roads themselves, the self-driving cars can also fare quite a bit better. We hope eventually they'll be able to form trains so that they use much less space on the roads. And conceivably, there's nothing preventing them going at much higher speeds. These are limited to 25 miles an hour, but there's no reason you couldn't go 100 miles an hour or faster safely once you prove that they can do that safely.
This is an electric car, right?
This one is electric, that's correct.
You talk about all those advantages, but there's a disadvantage, which is a lot of people like the idea of having their own car, being able to not depend on some service, or whether it's Google or some other company, to get the car to them and all of that. They want to be able to jump in their car. This is a very deeply held feeling among tens and millions of Americans. They want to jump in that car and go where they want to go. It could be across the country, it could be around the corner, and it matters to them.
And how do you battle that?
Well, I'm certainly not advocating that we get rid of all cars that do not drive themselves, though some of the safety features that we develop might be more broadly applicable to individually operated cars as well. I think that there's a mix. Some people do want to do that, some people don't. I don't know, you had the experience of being in there, and whipping out your phone.
Well, it was interesting because I felt like I was on a ride. It felt like a ride in a weird way because it's adorable. It's like this little round thing, and so it looks like, I named it Phyllis, but it was enjoyable. But it did feel like I was on a Disney ride. It felt like, and it wasn't disconcerting because I've been on rides or on a bus or a subway. It felt more like public transportation. And so that was interesting. I suppose I could get used to it because I do like to text. And I don't text and drive, by the way. But I do like to, it's a waste of time to be in a car in a lot of ways. So that was the plus. The minus is I do like to ride around and scream at people with my car and stuff like that. So, there's both back and forth.
I expect people will use a mix. Some people will probably want to have their own car that they drive. And sometimes they'll choose to use that, and sometimes they'll choose to use a self-driving car.
Can I ask an obvious question? If you have this car system, first of all, does Google want to be a car company? Because you've made the Nexus, you make prototypes of things. Are you going to be a car company?
Well, we actually don't make the Nexus.
But you want to sell cars.
So we've worked with partners to build these prototypes, and we expect we'll work with partners in the future, including automotive companies. And the Nexus is a great example because the Nexus phones are made by Samsung or LG and so forth.
Right.
And look, getting the technology to work and to be robust and reliable. And I should probably clarify where we are in this cycle. The reason that we want to talk about it today is because you're going to start to see these driving around, and
right.
want to explain what that is. But it's still early. We're still doing lots of development, both in the software, the hardware, and the experience.
So what's your estimate of when these might actually be sold or for real or operate in fleets or whatever?
I think being broadly available is still a long way away. I kind of when we had the California bill get signed by Governor Brown, that was like a year and change ago, I think, and I said 5 years till we can try these in some form. I hope that's still true. But these, I hope, we'll be testing them before the end of the year, I hope, with safety drivers. You can plug in a joystick, actually, or something similar to that. Anyway, there's the controller that we're working out for. And currently we have a fleet of these self-driving modified Lexus vehicles.
Yeah, there was just the stop button.
Yeah.
It didn't feel so good.
So we'll have that with the safety drivers. But within a couple of years, I hope that we will surpass the safety metrics we've put in place, which is to be significantly safer than a human driver. And we'll start testing them without drivers, and hopefully you'll be able to utilize them in some limited city.
So the obvious
Just within a few years.
Yeah.
So
But that's still on a test basis.
do you
That's with a small number of prototypes.
Do you anticipate federal regulatory problems with this?
I hope not. We've already worked with regulators on this. Obviously, the self-driving car project has been around and publicly known for a while, and California, Nevada, and Florida have legislation on the books that sort of addresses it. Historically, most vehicles were self-driving, as in, usually pulled by horses and things, so it's not unprecedented.
go back to the horse laws. That's a great.
Well, actually, the guy in the vehicle would try to control the horse.
Sometimes you have horses that are just.
So this is probably.
Anyhow, we've worked to try to come up with sensible regulations, and we're optimistic about being able to test in the U.S. and potentially abroad as well in the future. And yeah, we hope to be able to run it.
Can I ask an obvious mundane question? If you have the self-driving car fleet, don't you need to own the reservation system, which is Uber, which you have a big investment in? Do you need a reservation? Because these things are reservation systems, it's kind of thing, calling up the cars and things. You have a huge investment in Uber right now.
Yeah, I think some of these kinds of business questions, like how will the service be operated, will we operate ourselves or work with partners and things like that, are things that we'll sort out when it's closer to being widely deployed. I think that these initial test vehicles will probably just operate a service ourselves because it's going to be a very specialized thing. But longer term, it's not clear, and we are almost certainly going to partner with a lot of companies, possibly Uber.
So what's the fourth Google X project? You talked about 3. You said there
So
were 8.
yeah, I'm not going to tell you about all of them, but the glucose measuring contact lens.
Right.
That's been one of the ones I've been most excited about, and I can take the least credit for starting it. It turns out Babak, who worked on glass before, had a real passion about this. And
Is this in the broader sense of what you're doing? You're not going to tell us what the others are. One is an invisibility cloak, everybody, just FYI.
sorry, one is what?
One is an invisibility cloak, right?
Invisibility cloak.
Yeah.
That we've already developed. That's why I have our
Okay. Okay. Good.
PR person here whispering
Okay. Good.
answers to me. It's working pretty well, huh?
But it's really interesting that a company does this. You guys make so much money in your basic business search. I mean, it's literally like you could open a series of restaurants. Nobody would care at this point.
A series of restaurants?
Restaurants, Sergey's or something like that.
What?
A pancake place.
Sergey's restaurant.
Sergey's restaurants. You could open almost anything.
Who told you about that?
Oh, okay. The invisibility person. You could do almost anything. A line of sports clothing for you, absolutely. He shows up in this. He shows up in sports clothing. We went to a black tie dinner, and he showed up in sports clothing, and I went, "What is wrong with you?" And he goes, "What? I look great." And you did in sports clothing.
Was I wearing black tie? I don't remember this occasion.
It was black tie. Everyone was
Did I
in
have a black tie?
but you.
Is it just the tie that's key?
It was the dirty sports clothing. Anyway, we're not going to talk about this. We're not having a little reality show here. So, why is Google doing this stuff? What is the point of it? It's fascinating and interesting. And by the way, I think the self-driving car is critically important. That's one. I mean, I make fun of glass, and I continue to maintain my opinion of it. But the self-driving car is an important concept. Why is Google doing these things?
Is it just to satisfy
Your curiosity
or the teams, or is it actually a product development thing?
I think the answer is both. I think, first of all, it's important to work on something you really enjoy and feel passionate about. I personally really enjoy taking some kind of more challenging research project that has some real technical barriers and trying to turn that into something that's important and widely used. And I think it's important for companies in general to try to do new things. I mean, that's how new things happen.
Is there a process in the non-Google X part of the company to do big game-changing things that might be a little less out there than this, but which would change markets in a big way? I mean, like you did with search. There were some search providers before you, and you just took it to a whole other level when you appeared. Android was a little bit different because Apple had been out the year before, but Android has huge market share, but it wasn't like a whole new idea.
Well, okay, by that metric, search certainly was not a whole new idea. There was Excite, Lycos, Alta Vista, InfoSeek.
There were tons.
There were a lot of search engines before Google. But there were some things that I think we did that were unique and did better, and I think Android did some things uniquely better. And certainly the Android project, by the way, was going for a long time prior to Apple announcing and releasing the iPhone. So, but are there other things going on? Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of projects. I hope that they do well. I don't know.
And is Google X sort of off to the side doing these things, and maybe one of them will hit and become a big deal, or is it tightly integrated with the rest of Google?
No, it's certainly not tightly integrated. In fact, probably one of my criteria is to make sure that the projects are different and distant enough that we don't cause a lot of entanglement and complication. And none of the kinds of things that we work on, I hope, are ones that other groups at Google would be likely to pursue something similar. I think it's great that they are doing the other things at Google, but it's not my favorite thing to do to manage complicated entanglements between different parts of the company.
Do you manage any other part of Google? Do you spend any time there? I mean, you're on the board.
I am on the board. I spent a fair amount of time, though I stopped a little while ago, actually on the computer security stuff and I'm glad we rolled out a bunch of those defenses, both during my tenure and since. That's pretty much it.
What's your relationship with Larry like now?
It's been really good. Now I see him typically once or twice a week. We have I saw him today because we have some central meetings that I tend to go to, and I do participate in broader company issues during that time. But most of the rest of the week I'm off in Google X buildings, which are a little bit farther away.
So you're working on this kind of cutting edge technology. Are you patenting all these things? And what do you think in general about the whole business of the patenting of software and the patenting of tech ideas in general?
Well, Google X, by the way, develops lots of hardware. In fact, one of the requirements that I kind of instituted on Google X projects was that there has to be some component of it that's atoms, not bits, of each project. So we do patent quite a bit, and a lot of that is not software. I think that the patent system could be improved greatly, by many metrics, but it also is what it is. So I think we need to.
Well, how would you improve? Give me 2 examples of things that would be better.
I think
that could be or should be better.
I would exclude business process patents. I would also have different terms on different areas of patents, because I think 17, 19 years is too long, for example, for a lot of technology.
So you would shorten it?
I would definitely
because of the cycles of technology?
Yeah, I think the cycles don't make sense. It's not a reasonable trade for society to have something locked out for such a long period of time. I would also require that the patent holder be actually using and practicing the patent, not have just patent trolls. There are many, many ways in which it could be improved. I think fundamentally you have to look at 2 different possible future worlds. And let's say somebody invents some new square wheel or whatever. So what does the world A look like?
Project number 5, square wheel.
Yeah.
We are not reinventing the wheel, by the way, at Google X, and we have proper wheels from automotive suppliers on the self-driving cars. But anyway, let's say somebody invents this square wheel and they bring it to reality. You have to look at what does the world look at because they came up with this idea and got whatever protection they got for it, versus another world where they had never thought of it and they had never existed and so forth. And in many cases you would say, well, in world B, the next guy came up with that idea like 2 weeks later anyway. And in many cases that because in the US you can keep your patent a secret for a year anyhow, so you know that other companies or people were doing that to do that anyway, so you haven't actually gotten much benefit over that. The world B looks just as good
by giving the first
why did you give that person that
of
protection when the next guy came up with that in very short order? So I think whatever patent regime you have, it has to be the case that society is getting a good trade in that sense, that you have to be better off than if that person had never existed, never thought of that idea X.
And do you your partners, your main Android partner, Samsung, has lost a couple of patent court cases to Apple. Do you personally believe there's a role for juries and judges to litigate these things?
I think it would be much better if it were settled by the companies, and I think it would be better if the legislation sort of supported a smoother, clearer path. I think these are very nuanced, complicated issues. And by the way, I'm not a lawyer or patent expert, but I think it's going to be really hard for a jury and a judge to decide each one of these, and it's kind of a roll of the dice. And there's a lot of effort gets spent. There's a lot of uncertainty over the duration of the trial. I think it would be far better if the companies were able to come to a resolution themselves, and if the laws encourage that.
And would you feel that way if Samsung had won both these cases instead of losing them? Or
I haven't followed each case, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm sure there are a mix of assertions and patents, and some won, some lost. I'm sure it's a mix, and I'm sure it always will be.
So last question, and then we'll get to some questions from the audience. Competitors. Well, I don't know who your competitors are, but who do you consider Google X's competitors and then Google's? How do you look at the do you think about the competitive landscape at all, or you just go in and say, I'm going to invent this today, and not really care about that?
I kind of feel from a Google X point of view, really, if there are notable competitors, it's probably not a project we ought to be doing.
Right.
Because we have the capability to bring new things to the world. Now, there definitely are, after we've announced projects, there have definitely been other competitors that have come forth, and we've perhaps encouraged the sector, and that's great. And we'll still continue to work on that. But generally speaking, I'm not interested in doing things that are done by many other people.
And what about Google as a whole? How do you look at Google's competitors? You know a lot about Apple. You know a lot about Microsoft. What do you think is the kind of the playing for the status of those companies? Yahoo.
I think that we Google are at our best when we really change how something is viewed. For example, Gmail. I mean, certainly there was Hotmail and Yahoo Mail. There were other webmail services that existed, but Gmail, with its scale and searchability, it was basically, and I'm scared to use this term now because it's in this decade, it doesn't really mean the same things that they used to, but it was sort of an enterprise class email system. I mean, it was something designed for, anybody, that's what I use. That's what anybody who can't even spend a lot of money would use. So it's kind of changed it from webmail from being a toy to being a real high-end email and provided it to the world. And that kind of transformation is what I hope we do in all the sectors that we enter.
What
but
about
we may or may not succeed in all
What
of them.
about in social? How do you look at Google? You were involved in Google Plus early on, if I remember.
Marginally. I think I'm probably the worst person to speak about social. I'm just not a very social person myself.
Okay.
And I don't tend to.
You're not active on Google Plus?
I post a bit, mostly just to my, pictures of the kids to family, but that's not really, I don't like connect with a lot of people, or I'm kind of a weirdo. And it was probably a mistake for me to be doing anything tangentially related with social to begin with.
Okay.
Do you think the company needs to be a significant player in that field, and you think it will be?
I think it depends on what you view. Is that a field? Is that a feature? Is that a product in itself? I mean, certainly you want to be able to take pictures with your glass or with your phone and share it with your friends and family and so forth. And to not be able to do that doesn't make sense.
But to go back to what you said a few minutes ago about when you're talking about the patents and then later about how you choose projects, it's not as if there aren't other social networks already out there that have a lot of people in them where you can, from your Android phone, from your iPhone, whatever, just put the picture up there if you want. It's not as if Google Plus, is the only, oh my God, nobody else let you put your pictures up, we better have a product that does that.
I think that if you look at when we built that and so forth, it wasn't actually so easy. There weren't, a zillion apps there. We had a photo management, which probably people forget, like Picasa, and we had a lot of photos, and we definitely wanted those to be shareable, and it wasn't actually so easy to be able to integrate with other services to do that. Now today there is a way to share from the gallery. In fact, I don't know if we've quite shipped this publicly yet, but on my glass it just puts the photos in the gallery on the phone, from which I can Facebook or Google Plus or do whatever, or Instagram, or do whatever else I want. but that wasn't the case when we added the Google Pulse functionality across the range of Google products. And I think even still today, due to the dynamics of the business dynamics and so forth, it's actually not so straightforward to do that if we couldn't have access to the social network and friend lists and so forth.
So how long are you going to keep doing this? This crazy weirdo-ness?
Google X?
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything? I don't know. I'm pretty happy. As long as I stay happy, I'll certainly do it. I've been actually much happier with my job since I made the transition to Google X, and it's possible at some point that's going to outgrow the size that I enjoy, and I might want to double down, focus on an individual project or something.
What would you do after that?
Well, no, I might pick one project to just really be able to focus. I like working at a somewhat more manageable scale for me anyway. I like to be closer to the iron, as it were. So that's fun for me.
Great. Questions
Thanks.
from the audience?
Questions?
Wow. Okay, good. Let's start down here with Jessica.
Hi, Sergey. Jessica Lesson from The Information. Another example of atoms, not bits, is satellites. And I was wondering if you could talk at all about what Google or Google X is thinking about as strategy there. There have been a few interesting moves and hires. And would Google ever make its own satellites, like its own cars?
We already have a fleet of 1 million satellites over. No, I'm just kidding.
They're not kidding.
There's a lot of space up there. No, so there aren't, well, I don't really want to speculate about the other Google X projects, but no, there's no satellite things that I can announce today. We end up talking to lots of
Number
companies.
6, satellites.
You know what? You would make a great Bond villain. So good. You'd be so good. I'm just saying.
Also, I can't talk about the Fembot project. Sorry.
What's interesting to you about satellites?
Yeah.
What's interesting me
Is there
about
something
satellites?
You about satellites, yeah. As a,
I don't. There's nothing that I've particular. There are no Google X projects related to satellites. We certainly end up working with a lot of companies. I mean, some of the things you probably know about are for the imagery we collect for Google Earth,
Right.
like the GOI satellites and things like that. So we end up talking to lots of satellites, and satellites are a nice, useful piece of technology for lots of things. Especially equipped with those green lasers. Like
yeah.
that one's now in
Now we're
space.
talking.
I am so screwed. Go ahead.
Bobby.
Sergey, first, thanks for attending the conference. And I still love using Picasa. Quick question. How long do you think before the world is ready for what I think is a killer app for glass, remember someone's name?
Yeah, we've not put, well, not only have we not put facial recognition in glass, but we've actually asked our glassware developers not to put that in. It would be certainly a handy feature, especially at a conference like this. It's just, there's a lot that we've bitten off with this project as is, and I think the facial recognition is an area that society is still formulating its views on. So, well, there's 100 other things for us to work on first.
Couldn't you do it without facial recognition? So that if two different people were wearing glass, there would be some way to know the serial number of the other person's?
Yeah, I mean, you could use it if you're willing to install software, or you could do it from glass to phone or phone to phone for that matter. And I mean, there are lots of services that already do this. Usually they're for hooking up for sex, but...
Okay.
But,
Again, we're not going
All
there.
right.
Yes.
Larry.
Yeah, hi Sergey, Larry Magid.
Yes.
Last week, I think it was, a European court issued this right to be forgotten ruling, which really shook up a lot of people. Talk a little bit about, first of all, can it be implemented? I mean, assuming that you have to do it, I mean, how do you technically do something where you block search based on some notion that something may be irrelevant or out of date? And just, what's the follow-up to this? What's going to happen?
Yeah, great question. I think this, I wish we could just forget the ruling. But we're not forgetting the ruling. We are in process of implementing it. And You've touched on one of the most problematic elements about it, which is so much of the judgment is apparently left to, in our case, the search engine, which is not a place that I think we should be in. I don't know, for those of you who might not have heard about it, but in theory, when somebody comes to you and asks that, well, this should be eliminated from search, but for whatever reason, not from news, and I don't know if it needs to be taken out of the search on news sites. There's a lot of vagueness there. But based on whether it's relevant or not, and whether there's a public benefit or not, and so forth, maybe it should be not shown as a result. And that is not the kind of legislation that makes it easy to provide an information service. Now, whether you agree with the general concept or not, if they said, well, the law is you can't show these million URLs in whichever European country, okay, like that's something that the citizens there can agree or disagree with, but we can implement quite easily. Yeah, having these vague, very subjective laws for information providers, I think, is a bad idea.
Okay, Loic?
Hi, Sergey. There was an interesting story about self-driving cars I saw last week, where the car has to decide as a human, especially when you remove the driving wheel. So let's say the car has someone walking in front of it and has to stop. But right behind Kara, there is also a big truck coming full speed. And so the car has to choose between killing the person walking in front of the car or you in the car because the truck is coming. How do you...
It's like a dinner party, one of those things.
How do you decide?
Okay.
Who dies, Sergey?
So...
Kara, clearly.
In that case in particular, which I think is unlikely to happen, but nobody is likely to die because the frame of the car is actually quite strong, and we've already done crash testing of portions of it, and we'll be doing full crash tests shortly. Kara, I believe, will be safe even with a truck hitting her from behind. And there's also a lot of space. There's no real dash, so you have, plenty of space there. The seat belt, which I assume you're going to be wearing, will keep you restrained. And the person in front, walking in front of the car, in fact, even if it's, mechanically inevitable. Now, the car doesn't weigh that much, so I don't think, by the way, whether it slams on the brakes or not, if it's being pushed by this giant truck crashing to the back of it, is necessarily going to make the difference to the pedestrian. But the fact that we have developed this extremely cushy front and flexible windshield, I think will likely keep that person safe too.
But it still would have to make a choice of some kind. You said it was unlikely, but I could imagine that scenario. I mean, I don't know what the statistical probabilities are, but it's not a completely made-up idea. So what does the car do?
You
have to put some kind of priority in there, right?
No, look, the car is going to avoid running over the person, and it's unfortunate that if you believe it will be rear-ended in that case. But generally, it's also defensive, and more defensive than human drivers. It currently even doesn't enter a green light. It waits a little bit, and also there are side-facing radars that will alert it as to cars that are running the red light. These kind of hypothetical situations are, I don't know, we can debate as philosophers, but the fact is that we can make cars that are far safer than human drivers. In real life, these dilemmas don't occur with any substantive frequency, and there are over 30,000 auto fatalities in the US every year and over 1 million in the world, and they're almost always driver error. And I don't know, I've yet to hear of an actual case where it said like, oh, there was this dilemma, it had to hit this or that.
We actually tried to drive into the creator of Google car, the good self-driving car. Chris? Two people stood in front of the car.
We have
and we're like,
jaywalkers
let's
deliberately.
Go. And it stopped. Sadly.
Esther.
I wanted to see the foam in action. I did. I was interested in the foam.
So this question very briefly is about the right to live forever. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening with Calico, what you're trying to make it do, how it interacts with Google X, if at all?
The right to live forever. I haven't heard it described that way, but yeah, Calico, which there's not that much that I'm privy to, but I know that Art Levinson, who runs it, has been busy building a team and getting some great facilities, and they're really excited to work on basically making us to extending healthful life, which is I think it's great to have that direct mission rather than some of the more, less, I guess, direct incentives that people typically have in pharmaceutical or biotech companies. And yeah, from what I know, they're excited. They're doing all the biochemistry and so forth. They have interesting pathways they're studying and so forth. I imagine it's going to take a long time to achieve real results.
They might die before they dissolve it.
they better get moving. I think human lifespan is currently extending about 1 year per decade, which is obviously not enough to live forever. But I don't know. They seem really excited, and I have no reason to doubt that they'll help us live longer.
Okay.
Last question.
Hi, I'm Adam Gold. I'm the founder of SBL Capital. Firstly, thank you. 10 years ago, I invested in a startup IPO of a search engine. Because of that, I have my own investment firm. So thanks very much. Keep it up. I'm also a happy Glass Explorer, so I'm sorry to hear that we won't have the products available this year. It's one of those recognizable products. Friends all over the world ask about it, so hopefully it comes out soon.
Is there a question?
It is. My question is related to that. Why does it take so long for innovation to come out? And you think about it 15 years ago when you started the company, you're still focused really on the same thing, yet there's so many exciting projects. So why does it take so long for innovation to get through?
That's a great question. In the case of glass, the truth is there's been a lot of learning for me in terms of what it takes to get hardware out and how to manufacture it at scale, having the supply chain, all the components. There are a bazillion little components there that come from all around the world, and we have to put them all together. And then when you get a bad batch of one, or there's something we discover from our Explorer feedback that needs to be tweaked. It just takes a while. It's not software revs, and especially an online service. I'm used to turning around every day, but this does operate on the longer time scale. And it is a very new form factor, so we want to make sure we get a chance to get the feedback. But we're working away at it. Possibly, I wouldn't count on this year, but we're working quite at a feverish pace, and it's coming along. It's coming along. More broadly, yeah, I'm always frustrated at development cycles and how long it takes to do things. Hopefully we can record this question and I'll show it to all my teams. Like, why does it take so long? I feel like, in the good old days, back when I was developing Google on punch cards, going my little paper puncher, stapling that out. Yeah, it seemed like we could go a lot faster, and it's now all, JavaScript and Ajax, and all these kids want the blah, 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 social notes, like zillions of lines of incomprehensible gobbledygook. Yeah, I don't know why it takes such a long time. It's great.
He has no idea. He has no idea why. But he's going to yell at someone when he gets back to Google, okay?
Mission accomplished.
He's on it, okay.
I used to punch those little things out by hand to get Google.
I still don't know what you're talking about.
Paper cards.
Oh, yeah, okay. I had a really good social life in high school and stuff.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I used to that's how, we used to do it. You have these cards and they're little characters. It's like, it's like imagine a tweet, only 60 characters shorter, because they're in fact 80 characters on the punch card, but instead of it being like a tweet, like a text on your phone
we
or
could
something.
never
It's
date.
like
That's
little
just-
holes.
I think you're just digging a hole. You're digging a hole.
Anyway, Sergey, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
We really
Thank you.
appreciate it.